Good morning.
Good morning. Look at this.
We are blessed with this background of Croatia.
Rijeka,
Yeah.
one of the oldest ports in the world.
Um, and we had very little chance of going around the city, but the thing that I found interesting about the city is even if you haven't seen the sea and knowing that this is such an old port, you go around the city and you feel that this is a city about the port and the sea. Uh, and you cannot go through that and not understand the importance of culture.
So true, yes.
And I used to be one of those amongst perhaps the majority of people who have become disappointed by the idea of culture, that it has become about everything and nothing at all. It has been so misused and abused that we've come to think that it's not a worthwhile idea or a concept to build on. But recently, as I become immersed in sport, sport has changed so much my idea of culture, and we've done quite a bit of work lately on the relation between culture and risk intelligence, or becoming understanding risk differently. So maybe it's perhaps a good place to start in how what can we tell, what can we say about the importance, why is culture important for risk intelligent, to become risk intelligent?
Yeah. So the question is, why is cultural sensitivity or understanding of culture so important for risk intelligence? Pedro, I think we could have a very detailed conversation on this, but I think it's a very simple point that in first of all, let's try and understand what is culture or cultural sensitivity and what is risk intelligence, and then we can take it from there. And I think the point is simple, that in order to understand somebody else, you have to look at things from their point of view. And if you can develop that availability to observe and listen, which is to see and hear from another person's perspective, I think it's a long way to come to improve your risk maturity or risk intelligence. And essentially, risk intelligence is the idea that before you make a decision, can you hold yourself for a little bit of time, for you hold that doubt in your mind for a little bit of time before you make a decision, because a lot of decisions go badly because we react. We don't take the time to think and reflect before we act, and hence things go terribly wrong. I've had so many situations where people relationships are destroyed, and you see both sides and you wonder if only they took a few minutes to reflect before they reacted to that moment. So I'll start with a story actually. My father-in-law, when my daughter was born, he came to the UK. He comes from India, and so do we. And so the baby was just born, and it was just maybe the next day we brought the baby from the hospital to home, and one of our neighbors, he dropped a small little present outside the door, and he didn't knock or he didn't ring the bell, and he just left it there. And I opened the door, I brought the present in, and my father-in-law saw it, and he said, "What's that?" I said, "My neighbor, he's just left a present." And I was expecting he would say, "Oh, that's very kind of him." And he was, and that what he said actually shocked me in the first instance. He said that how ridiculous is that somebody would just leave a gift outside. That's impolite, he said. He said, "You should come inside, you should sit with us, and you should have a cup of coffee, and you should congratulate the parents." And at that point I said to him, "It doesn't work like that in the UK. They respect your privacy, they respect your first experience as a parent, And it's a different way of looking at life. But the mistake I made was exactly what most people do, which is to go in the telling mode that you should know better, that this is the culture here. And if I look back, I think that's the crux of the problem. And the repercussions of telling him rather than listening to him and trying to help him realize that this his world and not other people's world is that he went around spreading this story for the next 10 years of his life, to say that I went to, my daughter is 11 now, it's been 11 years, and every time we speak to him, every time he speaks to his friends and relatives, he says it's a ridiculous culture out there. Babies are born and people just leave stuff outside the door. So he clearly hasn't come to terms with that worldview. And I use the word worldview because in his worldview, in his understanding, in his that you cannot do that. That's considered impolite. And when he sees another worldview, he's left shocked completely. And in that moment, if you try to tell him that no, it doesn't work like this here, you are doing exactly what we do when we issue non-conformance on board a ship or an asset whatsoever, that we, instead of listening to people, we'll tell them that you shouldn't be doing this. This is not in accordance with my worldview, and it's not in accordance with my contextualized processes, because contextualized processes is your way of looking at something. So I think that's very, very problematic. If instead we took a little bit of time to appreciate that person's worldview, which consists of their metaphors, which consists of their models, their methods of how they arrive at a particular truth, we would learn so much about that person. And I think, just to build on that little bit, that every worldview is coherent. My father's worldview is very coherent. The Western worldview about leaving presents outside and not infringing upon somebody's privacy is also very coherent. It's just two different ways of seeing the world. And so when we talk about a coherent worldview, what we mean by that is that there is a method, there is a methodology, there is an ethic, which is what is considered morally right and wrong. There is a choice of certain words. For example, in this case, privacy, individualism, respect for the neighbor, and so on. And then there is another worldview which comprises of a very different metaphor. For example, social relationships, celebrations, and get-togethers. So they are very coherent worldviews in their own. The trouble is when we don't take the time to appreciate another person's worldview, and that's where the problem happens. And if we did that, if we did try that, we will experience a little bit of dissonance, discomfort. And that discomfort creates doubt in our mind. That doubt makes us question our assumptions, our metaphors, our models, our methods, and so on. And something amazing happens when we question our models and methods, that we learn something. What are the gaps in our assumptions? What assumptions are we making? Where are the gaps in our worldview? And that, I think, is what connects cultural sensitivity to risk intelligence, that before we make a decision, we question ourselves because we have seen something that is not coherent or that is not aligned with our worldview. And that is what makes us risk intelligent.
Yes. I think that's very, very clear. There's one thing that you touched upon, which I think most people would be tempted to dismiss, no matter how clear that was. They would dismiss it entirely on, we still very much attached to this idea of yes, okay, there are different worldviews, there are different perspectives, but then there are other perspectives, but then there's the rule. And the rule is objective, and there's in the rule and outside the rule. So it seems very hard to abstract yourself or to abandon this black and white worldview. which is just a worldview. It's not objectivity in any way. How can we help demystify this idea that there's a right and wrong regardless of worldviews?
Yeah, if I understand your question correctly, what you're referring to is that, granted that there are perceptions and there are no objective realities, at some stage somebody will question the fact that, there is an objective truth and you can't deny that because you have facts, you have evidences to prove that. Am I right in assuming
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. And that the example you gave is that someone goes out on a ship and issues a non-conformity.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
And doesn't take 1 second to listen to the perspective of the crew. And if they did, that would entirely change. That they would eventually, perhaps, I assume, end up realizing that from their perspective, that is pursuing the abidance of that rule. How?
I will answer this question a little bit differently, and I answer these questions based on my understanding of, let's say, Indian mythology, Greek mythology, and the Roman mythology. And one of the things I was reading just a couple of days ago, Pedro, was that there was an Indian god. No, that wars. It's not. We don't believe in wars and the history when it comes to God. God is with us all the time in the Hindu mythology. But that's mythology. So in the mythology, Lord Rama goes to the jungle, and with his tutor, with his mentor, Vikramacharya, and they see a demon, a woman demon, and her name is Hidimba, and his tutor, his mentor, asks him to kill her, and he says, I cannot do that because the rules, in accordance with the rules, you cannot raise a weapon on a woman. And at which point his tutor reminds him that if the woman is evil and she is creating a lot of problems in the world, then it is your duty to do that. At which point he realizes, yes, he has to do that, and he picks the bow and the arrow and he kills this woman Hidimba. And the point is this, it's mythology, of course, it's all mythology, but the point is this, that there comes a time in life when you have to contextualize the rules. Mm-hmm. You have to put rules in perspective. There are many, many rules, and we will pick and choose things that would align with our agenda. So if you are an inspector and if you go on board a ship and you see something that you don't like, that you disagree with completely, and you disagree with it because it does not conform with your worldview, you will not think twice to back it up with rules and processes and issue a non-compliance. But if you look at it from another person's point of view, you might realize that they will also have some rules and processes from their own understanding, which gives them this coherent worldview about why they should be doing something. And I think understanding that is so powerful because it helps you understand that there is no such thing like rules and processes in the wild, in the jungle. Mm-hmm. Everything has to be applied in a particular context. So if you took the time to understand their world, which is where I'm repeating myself now, you will come to know that the limits of your model, and as I said to you before, every worldview is consistent, is absolutely consistent, because there are rules, there are processes, there are some constraints to back it up, until you enter into another worldview and you realize that there are rules and processes and methods and models to back it up as well. And I'm not suggesting one is better than the other, but I think if you are a person in position of power and authority, like an inspector, like a senior leader, like a manager, and you are frustrated that things are not working as you would like them to, then I think it is important to, from time to time, to take stock of your own worldview. And the only way you can, it's a very hard thing to take stock of your worldview because that's how you see the world. Yeah. The only way you can do it is by stepping into somebody else's worldview and saying, wow, I never saw an apple like a fruit. I always felt an apple was a technology until you go into somebody else's world and you realize, my goodness, I never thought apple could also be something else and something else and something else. Yeah, and just to finish it off, and I think one of the things that is very important here to say is that we are not searching, if you are a person who wants to learn and he wants to become risk intelligent, then we are not searching for that objective truth at some stage. What we are doing here is that we are trying to appreciate the different, if you like, figments of reality, the different fragments of reality, as somebody said to me a few days ago. Figments is a beautiful word. And each piece either challenges or reconfirms what we already know, but what we are moving towards is this idea of getting to understand the limits of our worldview, getting to understand the limits of our knowledge, which I call wisdom. And what wisdom does to you is that if you stay in that zone, is that you come to a point where you get a lot more clarity about what is the real issue here, what is the real problem here. And you can get to a stage in this journey where you can start to name the problem.
Which takes us right back to risk maturity.
Absolutely. So, Tahitians, for example, did not have a concept for grief for a very, very long time, until the anthropologist Ben Levy went there, and he thought that, these are Tahitians, and every time somebody dies, they're falling sick. They feel disgusted. They go through so much, but they don't know. They don't have a word for grief. And until the term for grief was coined, until they identified the problem that this is they are suffering from a real issue here, they don't have a word, and hence they don't have a ritual to deal with uncertainty. And I think what I'm trying to say is that the more people like Ben Levy and us leaders stay in that gray zone and try to engage with different perspectives, different realities, at one stage you start to name the problem. And naming the problem is the beginning of all this, because once you have named the problems, like Tahitians came to understand the idea of grief, what you are left with then is, okay, now I can appreciate the problem. How can I mindfully tackle the problem? You will never solve any problem. That's wishful thinking. But you can mindfully tackle the problem. If you have an organization with limited resources at the end of the day, you know that you're sitting on firm grounds. And this whole idea of reacting to a problem very quickly, this is not my worldview, this is rubbish, does not align with my understanding, this is non-compliance, and you spend endless amount of time putting your energy, undermining your relationship with the other person, because there's no way they will align with your world. They have a different way of seeing the world, and you have to make an attempt if you want to connect the gap between the two. So the onus lies on you at the end of it.
Because you have the power.
You have the power, yeah.
Thank you. I think we've included quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to the idea of, it's very simple actually, cultural sensitivity for risk intelligence. I think that the point is very simple, and you can make it as complicated as you like, that at the end of the day, if you want to understand something, you have to submit control, and you have to listen. And it's very hard, but if you embark on this journey, it's very fruitful in the long run.
Yes, it is. And this is certainly for a different talk. I think we have enough, but it takes us then to the idea that you cannot listen or appreciate the different perspective or the different worldview unless you allow yourself to experience it.
Oh yes,
and that is such a big step, and that I think this is why it becomes such a difficult path for most people to go.
Can I just briefly say something here? I was at a Quaker meeting 2 weeks ago, a Quakers meeting in Aberdeen, and Quakers are very unique in many ways, and what is interesting about a Quaker meeting, I experienced it for the first time. I had read a lot of book on Quakers, but I just wanted to experience it. And I went to that meeting and I just sat there as soon as I entered the room, they said, "Do you know the Quaker rules?" I said, "No." I said, "You just go and sit. You don't speak. You just sit in silence for an hour. If anyone has a strong urge to speak, they will speak. So you just observe the silence. That's what we do in the meeting." And I went and sat in the meeting, and I saw that for about 20 to 30 minutes, it was complete silence in the room. Complete silence. Nobody would speak until somebody would get up. They will say a few words, and the interesting thing is, people will just observe. They will not utter a word. They will not judge. They will not say. And then after, there will be another 10 or 15 minutes of silence, and then somebody will get up and then say something. No judging, no building upon, no arguing to say that my point is better than yours. Wonderful, wonderful experience, Pedro. And then at the end of it, they asked me if you could join for a coffee, and I did, and it was wonderful. But what was interesting was that as I was leaving the meeting, somebody asked me, "So what do you do?" I said, "I'm an anthropologist and I study culture." And she said, "So how do you study culture?" I said, "Exactly the way I wanted. I just wanted to come and experience this." I'd read a lot of books on Quaker culture. I wanted to come and just feel it, because all learning is in the feeling.
Yeah.
So at which point she said, "That's very interesting, because we had a person who was studying theology, and he came here and he asked a lot of questions from us." And I thought, at one stage she said, it was very funny, she said, "I thought his head was swollen by the time he left." And she was so clever, she was so wise in many ways, because she realizes that this brain-centric learning, which is all about taking more information from people, misses the point that people don't learn from more information. People learn through experience.
Yeah.
There's something happening in that room. There is a lot happening in that room that needs to be felt.
Yeah.
You have to feel it, because through that feeling, it will become part of the body. And when it becomes part of the body, this is when people experience a shift in their perspective and shift in their worldview.
Yeah.
And that shift in the worldview is what is the ideal ground for learning. Great educationalists like Ken Robinson, Guy Claxton, there's so many of them
Yes.
have made this point that Peter Senge have made the point that learning has to be felt and experienced. And to answer your question, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that brain-centric, information-based regurgitation, somebody says something and you just vomit it out, pass the test, get a certificate, is not learning.
Yeah.
Learning has to be felt. Yes.
Yeah. And that just takes you further and further away of standing any chance of understanding the different worldview, the different perspective, and hence take you even further away from risk intelligence or risk maturity.
But there is a danger to that, because what happened in the case of my father-in-law was he felt something unusual, but he could not rationalize it. He could not give that feeling a name. So he felt something. He didn't read a book on the Western culture. He felt it. He could not make an attempt. He did not slow down to rationalize it. He went back to his own worldview, reinforced it even more. For the last 11 years, he's been telling this story that this is nonsense. And this is the problem, you see. When you feel something and you feel it's awkward, and if you don't take the time to reflect on it, you will just keep reinforcing what you already know for the rest of your life. And that's dissonance, that's cognitive dissonance. But if you
Sorry, which is exactly what happens when you're confronted with an inspector that issues a non-conformity.
That's right, yes. And it leaves both sides more bitter,
Yep.
more hurtful, and it increases the gap between the two sides. And hence, what you get at the end of it is rather than one culture, you get subcultures.
Yeah.
And those subcultures keep colliding. And the funny bit is, we think that we can solve all this through processes and structures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wishful thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
You need to bring it back to relationships, trust, asking open questions, surrendering control, listening, observing the world from another person's point of view. So I think that's where we started.
Yes. I think we closed the loop magnificently. Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Anything you'd like to?
No, it's good. It's good fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.